Yeah, I was really hoping to speak last year, but it fell on my partner's birthday, so I wasn't allowed. But look, it's delightful to be here tonight. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. As Mick said, my name is Vanessa, and I'm the founder and CEO of Climate Clever. Climate Clever is a social enterprise. We help schools, households, and businesses begin their climate journey, start to measure and reduce their carbon footprint. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and say a big thank you for doing such an incredible job of looking after this particularly beautiful piece of land that we're on today. We've managed to stuff it up in kind of 200 years. They've looked after it impeccably for many thousands of years. So we have a lot to learn from them. So I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So today I want to share a little bit about my journey into working in sustainability and climate change. I'm going to share a bit of the learnings my journey, and then the learnings along the way. I will clarify some terms and definitions similar to Celia, and also share some case studies, and hopefully leave you with the conviction that if you haven't already started, to get started on your own climate journey. So I guess my first sort of step into, I was going to say decarbonisation, dioxide equivalentation, if we're taking Celia's definition, really happened when I first moved to Perth in 2009. I came over to do my PhD, and I was managing an Australian Research Council funded grant called Decarbonising Cities and Regions, and I sort of fell into academia for the next decade, researching, supervising and lecturing all things around sustainability and climate change. But it wasn't until 2012, I was still doing my PhD, that I really had the inspiration for creating Climate Clever. I had recently helped to certify the first carbon neutral school in Australia with my colleague and friend, Dr. Samantha Hall, and we were really keen to see how we could actually scale what we did with that school to more schools. So several years later, we ended up launching a pilot with 15 schools across Metro Perth. We didn't really have any funding or much funding, so we used Excel spreadsheets and Google Docs, and it was really what I refer to as our low-tech, low-cost pilot. It was the traditional MVP, minimal viable product, but we basically gave these schools the tools and resources to start their climate journey, and we helped them to create what we called the Carbon Reduction Action Plan, which the teachers very quickly pointed out had an unfortunate acronym. But we also helped them, provided some emotional support as well. We caught up monthly for in-person meetups where they could share stories and experiences, get advice, and just get support from each other. And I know that there's quite a few sustainability practitioners in the room, and I know that we all know that we sometimes just need a hug or a shoulder to cry on or a wall to bang our head against. So that was a really important element, I think, of the program. But we had great results from that program. I think one of the key things that we identified was the fact that schools were really inefficient, largely from sort of ageing infrastructure, old appliances and sometimes poor behaviour. But that meant that there was a huge opportunity to actually address this and reduce their emissions and save them lots of money in the process, and also help to educate and upskill the next generation around resource efficiency, sustainability and climate change. So after this pilot, we started getting approached by lots of other schools wanting to join the program, and we knew that we couldn't scale that with Excel spreadsheets, and that we had to create a platform or an app. And fortunately, that pilot sort of provided enough evidence and traction that we won our first grant, which enabled us to start building that platform. So the following year, in 2018, I launched Climate Clever with 30 schools across Australia and with a brand new platform. And that provided the sort of proof of concept that enabled me to raise my first round of investment from impact investors. And I also won a big Lottery West grant that year as well, which was a great start. This was all happening around the same time that Greta Thunberg started her climate revolution, and kids across the world were taking to the streets demanding climate action. And we felt a really strong sense of purpose that we were actually able to help those students who were feeling obviously enormous climate grief and anxiety, primarily because they felt so powerless as young people. So we felt like this was great that we had the opportunity to actually say, hey, you can actually make a difference in your school and in your home as well. So the following year, 2019, with a little bit of cash in the bank, I started to grow my team. This was our team in our first office in Fremantle. We had no heating, no hot water, and very crappy internet, which was not ideal for a tech company. And you can see by the stupid grin on my face, that was the naive excitement of an entrepreneur before they start their journey, or probably anyone working in sustainability really, before you hit the sort of barrage of challenges and obstacles that you inevitably hit. And our first one was COVID the following year. So obviously schools started to close down, and there was this shift to schooling from home. I'm sure many of you with kids remember that too. But you could imagine the frenzy that ensued from teachers and schools and the education department trying to facilitate that. So sustainability and climate change unfortunately sort of fell to the bottom of the list there. But that's okay, we were a startup and we were trained for this, so we pivoted and we really focused in on the Lottery West grant, which was all about creating a platform for homes to help households who were all of a sudden locked in their houses to start to reduce their utility bills and obviously their carbon footprint. We love the concept of this as well though, because it meant that we could actually start to tie that in with schools, and we could start to measure the impact that came from working with schools, getting the kids to take that home and start to reduce their home carbon footprint. So using the kids as conduits of sustainability. And then local governments started to see what we were doing, and we had a few reach out to say if they could partner with us, because they really wanted to help drive community climate action in their local government areas. So we soon partnered with 30 local governments across Australia, which is really great. Later that year, we're still in 2020, we also featured on ABC's Fight for Planet A with Craig Ruckersell, and that was an awesome opportunity. But unfortunately, none of this really led to a big uptake of schools signing up or getting on board. So in 2021, we decided we needed to shift focus again, and we decided that focusing on businesses, and in particular small businesses or SMEs, could be a really good focus. They're similar to schools, face similar probably issues and barriers, but arguably perhaps a little bit more pressure from consumers and things that are regulations that might be coming down eventually. But what we found actually was that there were other issues as well facing SMEs, and I think starting to talk to them, we started realising, gosh, they're really confused, daunted and overwhelmed with even where to get started, particularly when you start talking about scopes of emissions. So on that note, I know that we are probably a room of sustainability enthusiasts, and you all probably do know about this, but for the few that might be still a little bit confused, I'll just quickly go through what Scope 1, 2 and 3 means when we talk about emissions. Scope 1 emissions are direct emissions that sort of happen within your company. So when fossil fuels are combusted, they're on site. So a perfect example is a petrol car. If you've got a car in your organisation, you're driving it, there's tailpipe emissions coming out. That's a direct Scope 1 emission. Scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions, and specifically from electricity production, also perhaps heat and steam, but for most businesses it's just electricity. It's indirect because you're not personally responsible for it. It's the coal-fired power station most likely down the road, but you're using that energy. And then Scope 3 emissions is everything else that's sort of connected to your business. It's that supply chain, both up the supply chain and down the supply chain. So for businesses, this could be tens to hundreds to thousands of different suppliers that these businesses are starting to go, oh my gosh, do I have to measure this as well? And then to add to the complexity, you can calculate emissions using either activity data or financial data. Activity data are things like utility bills, so the kilowatt hours of electricity that you've consumed or the litres of diesel. It's far more accurate because we know that there's an emission factor specifically for those sources. Or you can use financial data, which is a bit more broad. It sort of covers maybe industry sectors or services or sometimes products as well. And it's either how much dollars spent you have spent on that particular industry. Like I said, it's less accurate because it's more broad. And also it's very challenging because you might actually go out of your way to choose a low carbon supplier, and you might pay more for them because they are doing their bit. But under that methodology, your emissions would go up because you're spending more on that particular supplier. Anyway, all that complexity aside, the great news is we are seeing momentum building around climate action, and this is a great thing. Obviously in Australia we had a change in government last year. We've got new targets in Australia, which is fantastic. Arguably not ambitious enough, but in the spirit of my theme today, it's a starting point and we've just got to get started. We can improve on that. We've got global legislation happening as well, so very much driven by the EU, big focus on supply chain emissions, and the International Sustainability Standards Board. For those that work in sustainability, probably saw that they've released some new standards as well. But it was really this focus on Scope 3 emissions that had led to our partnership with ICN, or Industry Capability Network. They're quite a large national organisation that have procurement and supply chain tools to drive economic growth. They've got 80,000 suppliers on their platform, and they were really looking for a solution to help particularly these smaller players get started. And so through that partnership and through others, we've managed to capture some really interesting data from some of these small businesses that are trying to get started. And this is an example, more than or around 50% of the businesses that register interest with us say it's the single biggest priority for them, or they've been tasked with finding a solution. That's really great news. It doesn't always end in a conversion or someone actually signing up or taking action. And that's largely because they are still obviously identifying barriers around that, and cost and time are probably the two big ones there. But the other great news is they're telling us and helping us to identify what the reasons that are motivating them to sign up. And here's just a list of some of them. A lot of these are backed up by research and statistics as well around the world of why to take action. And another one that we found, another reason for taking action, was the pressure that is starting to build. And this is another example of one of our clients that has signed up. This is Grant from NMT Global. He's a logistics company. And he actually saw this come through in a tender contract, which actually said that not only did he have to, if he wanted to go for this project, not only would he have to measure his own emissions, but he'd also have to capture the data from his subcontractors as well. So he obviously had quite a few subcontractors, and he started going, oh gosh, and that was one of the motivating reasons why he signed up. Oh, there's been a little bit of a failure there, formatting failure. This is Megazorba, another one of our businesses. They also started seeing climate and emissions coming through on some of their tenders and proposals. So they really thought that this is a great opportunity to have that competitive advantage. They leaned all the way in. They became carbon neutral. They've even changed their logo to reflect their sustainability commitments. I think it's fantastic. But interestingly, they also asked us if we could verify or certify them as well, because they were worried about greenwashing. They wanted to make sure that their claim had credibility. And this is not surprising, because obviously we are seeing an increase of prevalence of greenwashing happening. And the ACCC are obviously cracking down on it, which is great. It's usually the bigger businesses that are doing the false and misleading claims, and it should be cracked down. But I'm personally a little bit worried about the effect or the impact this is having on some of these smaller businesses who are now kind of terrified to make any sort of carbon claim, and even in some cases get started. And of course, when we talk about definitions, these are sort of ever-changing and shifting as well, from carbon neutral to net zero to climate positive. But I thought I would take a quick minute to define or clarify, compare these two, because they are quite different, but they are often used interchangeably. So carbon dioxide equivalent neutral is basically you can measure your emissions and then offset 100% of them and become carbon neutral overnight if you want to. Net zero, on the other hand, has a different definition, which is about you have to reduce 90% of your footprint, and you can't offset more than 10%. And that's of those really hard things like flights where you really don't control the fuel in there. But it means you have to literally eliminate fossil fuels from your business and operations. And that's why that's often a longer term goal, because it's going to be more costly, it's harder to do, and sometimes the technologies aren't there yet as well. So it's not surprising, again, that all of this confusion around definitions, confusions around definitions and do we need to dance around or something? Is it? Oh, it worked. Look at that. And the concern around greenwashing has actually led to a new phenomenon. I don't know, who's heard of green hushing? A few people? Yeah. So green hushing is where businesses that are legitimately trying to do, put genuine effort into climate action and or set targets are too afraid to actually publicly talk about it, so they're just not saying anything. So where greenwashing is eroding consumers' confidence in genuine climate action, green hushing is sort of sweeping those genuine actions under the carpet, which is basically preventing the normalisation of climate action, which I think is actually even more dangerous, because we want everyone to know and think that everyone is taking climate action, and you're going to be left behind if you're not. So I think this is a really dangerous thing that we have to be concerned about. So my main message tonight is just get started. It is a journey. Don't wait to be perfect or to have all the data or to have everything in place. You can take little steps now, and you can improve along the way. That's really the key message. I speak to businesses literally on a daily basis that 100% agree with me that climate change is a super important issue. The writing's on the wall, the regulation's coming, but they're just not quite ready to get started now, and they just sort of keep kicking the can down the road and delaying. And this is just a quick example of one company I talked to recently. It's a civil construction company. They have 250 big diesel trucks, plus a couple of offices and warehouses and a fleet of 100 light vehicles, so cars. And they'd already done their carbon footprint, and they knew that 95% of their emissions came from those big trucks. And when we talked about, but what are some of the things you could do? Maybe you could convert your cars to EVs and get some solar on, charge them through that. He said, yeah, we could probably do that, and the cost isn't even that big an issue, but it's not really going to make a dent in our carbon footprint, so we're not going to really bother. And it just shocked me and concerned me, and I was just thinking, wow, how damaging is this particularly as a message for other businesses that might have one or two, cars that are really going ahead and trying desperately to decarbonise, to write off what could essentially be quite a lot of emissions, but also that collectively, that that aggregated, that's a lot of emissions if you have all these businesses doing something. So here on the other side, we've got another company also in construction. They've got over 1,000 diesel-powered stationary equipment, and they've just jumped headfirst in as well. They're being really proactive. They're starting to measure everything. They're putting in place, the little actions they can do now. They clearly have a big challenge ahead of them, which they know, but they understand it's a transition. So what can you do? I'd like to ask quickly, who here works for a company? Well, look at that, most people. So my big question to you is, ask the question of your company, what are you doing about climate change? Ask if you can join a green team or create a green team. If they are saying they're publicly doing something, question what that is and help keep them accountable. And just get up and do something. And I just want to end on this slide. Is Gemma in the room? I met Gemma a couple of weeks ago. She's a master's student at Curtin University, and she's also an intern at a massive global company. And she approached me a couple of weeks ago because she's also volunteering on their green team internally, and she approached me to see what we did and how we could potentially help them as well. And I was really inspired because I thought, well, here's an intern who arguably has very little influence in the company, but that's not stopping her from actually asking the questions, finding solutions, proposing solutions, and just jumping in there. So my challenge to all of you tonight is dust off those excuses, step up and be the one that drives change in your organisation. Thank you.